Asking you about something that Donald Trump said. And I want you to imagine coming upon this if you were now, today, at Thousand Oaks Elementary School in Berkeley, California, where you went to school. If you were a girl there now, eighth grader, and you're on the bus on the way home, you're walking home, and this quote pops up on your phone of Donald Trump saying, "They're poisoning the blood of our country." When you got home after reading that, what would you say to your mother? He's talking about your blood.
So, I was raised, as you know, a child of parents who were active in the civil rights movement. And I was raised knowing that there will be some people who will use their voice in a way that is meant to dehumanize, meant to suggest that the vast majority of us don't have anything in common, when in fact the vast majority of us have more in common than what separates us. And I would interpret it, I think, then as I do now, which it is language that is meant to divide us. It is language that I think people have rightly found similar to the language of Hitler. And I think it's just critically important that we remind each other, including our children, that the true measure of the strength of a leader is based not on who they beat down, but who they lift up. And sadly, I think that there's something perverse that has happened in our country over the last many years, which is to suggest that strength looks like a bully, when in fact the real character of a leader is someone who has empathy, who has some level of concern and care for the suffering of other people, and then does something to alleviate that suffering.
And both of your parents
go.
Your mother is no longer with us. What do you suppose she would say, hearing Donald Trump say that about her?
Well, my mother could use very salty language sometimes. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what I think she might say. But, my mother was a fighter, and she was a fighter for equality. My mother had two goals in her life: to raise her two daughters and end breast cancer. My mother dedicated her life to solving problems and taking care of people. And there's no question in my mind that her response to that kind of language would be probably, she also was a student of history. We've seen this before. We know where this could go. So stand up and fight for what is right.
The situation in Israel now for the administration seems to be trying to find the balance between Israel's right to defend itself as a country and protecting the lives of civilian Palestinians. Do you think that you and the Israeli government have achieved that balance, or has it reached a point, or when might it reach a point, where the correct balance is simply a ceasefire?
So our position as the United States, and the position that the President and I and we have taken from the day of the horror of October 7, where, as you know, 1,200 people were massacred, many of them young people who were simply going to a concert, where women were assaulted and abused. Our position has always been that Israel has a right to defend itself, without any question. And how it does so matters. And as I have said many times, and I think we know, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. And it is important then that, and we have made clear our perspective on this, that there be a lessening of the intensity and more precision around how Israel goes after Hamas and the leadership.
I was just telling everybody this.
And as you know, Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin have paid now repeated trips to
You know what I'm saying? Like, we had
to make
fun,
our
we don't
position
fuck
on
now.
that.
You ain't got to do all that.
But
But all that little video shit, y'all trying to keep niggas out the
happening
video,
now
trying to show your little food
toward
and shit, your little
what
drink and
is
shit, and you ain't even
possible
paying for it.
and should be possible the day after, as we call it. Lawrence, as you know, I was in Dubai recently, meeting with a number of leaders, including many Arab leaders, to talk about our commitment as the United States to a two-state solution.
Took the time out to address that on their setting, on their show, when it was supposed to be about them. They called me a crackhead. It's just getting too deep.
And the commitment to doing the hard work that will require to get to a place where we, for the purposes that we have stated, will insist there be no reoccupation of Gaza by the Israelis. There will be no forced displacement of Palestinians.
So back to Love and Hip
But we
Hop, when
work
you
toward
left the show, they
equal
blamed it
measures
on the
of
alcohol. Was
security,
that them using
prosperity,
that?
and freedom for Israelis and for Palestinians. And so that is a big part of our goal at this point as well, which is to do what is possible to lay the pathway for that possibility and that goal.
Well, Secretary Austin, speaking in Israel yesterday, said that protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral duty and a strategic imperative. Does the Israeli government agree with you on that?
We have repeatedly made that point clear in both public and private conversations. And I can, of course, not speak for the Israeli government. I will not speak for the Israeli government. But our position has been clear, and we've been quite adamant about that. As you probably know, from the beginning, for example, we have been pushing for increased humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza, understanding that the consequence of not supplying that aid has been dire, and we've all seen the images and we've witnessed, therefore, real tragedy in terms of the loss of innocent life.
The other foreign policy crisis that President Biden has been managing, we've been managing along with him, is obviously Vladimir Putin's attack and war on Ukraine. Ukraine funding is now, of course, facing struggles that it wasn't facing a year ago. How important is it, and what is the future of Ukraine funding? If you get it now, will there be more support for Ukraine throughout the year?
Lawrence, it's critically important that we see this through. From the beginning, let's be clear, when this happened on February 24th of that year, what we saw is a violation of long-standing international rules and norms. Those rules and norms being the importance of protecting sovereignty and territorial integrity, the importance of standing up against any nation forcibly trying to change borders. And we, the United States of America, have been a leader for the world and our allies, and in particular Joe Biden has been a profound leader in bringing together nations to the point that we are now looking at an expansion of NATO where some before this happened.
My life, what I love, therapeutic for me, and I'm just excited to be back.
All right, walk us through that last play.
Call 12. I really didn't want Coach to call the timeout. That's why I told him, yeah, that's the play I wanted to run right there. They believed in me. I actually wanted to go to chip in the post. They told me no, so I had to deliver for them.
What does this do for your team? We just saw how your teammates responded to you.
They're my guys, my brothers. We put in the work together. Hard practices, light practices, treatment, flights. We spent a lot of time together through this process. They helped me out a lot. It just saying positive things to me, told me to, stay true, keep working, and, it shows right there with them, believing in me, and it shows, how excited everybody is for me to be back.
What a return to action. Thanks for stopping. Nice job.
Yes, sir. Hey, happy birthday, Mom. I'm on the way home.
Question the relevance of NATO, its very existence. So the role of the United States of America to stand on principle, foundational principles for the globe about what leads to security, stability, and prosperity is at stake. And I traveled the world. I've now met...
You don't pull up no way.
with over 100 world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, and kings. And even in my most recent travels, recently in the last few weeks to the United Kingdom, to Dubai, I can
Really, and at first, I was making $15 an hour, maybe $70 a day, $74 a day. Compared to $300 money, I was cashed out. Just a second. You tell the story.
tell you that our allies and our adversaries around the world, are watching to see if the United States is going to follow through in its commitment to these principles. And I think the tragedy of the moment is that there are people in Washington, D.C. who don't actually understand the significance of this in terms of America's role of leadership, global leadership, and instead playing politics in terms of the security package as a whole. It includes assistance for Ukraine to see through commitment we made to important principles. It includes assistance to Israel, to what we need to do in terms of assistance to Taiwan, and then, of course, more resources going to the border. So I think that it is an issue that everyone who is watching should connect with in terms of urging members of Congress to actually participate in a bipartisan way, in particular on issues that relate directly or indirectly to our national security. And you and I, Lawrence, have talked about it many times. When I was in the Senate for the 4 years I was there, one of my favorite experiences as a senator was being on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I'll tell you why. That meeting took place in a SCIF, which is a secure room where no one could bring in their cell phones. There was no public, no press, just us. And people would then walk in that room, regardless of their political party, and take off their jackets, have a cup of coffee, roll up their sleeves, and not act as Democrats or Republicans, but act as Americans who should prioritize first and foremost our national security and the best interest of the people of our country in terms of ensuring that we are standing for our principles.
The anniversary of the Supreme Court Roe v. Wade decision has always been, it was for 50 years, a day of protest in Washington, usually not very large protests, but protest by the people who wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade. Apparently it's going to be something different this year. You announced today that on January 22nd, which is that anniversary,
hey, good morning. How's your day going so far?
The Vice President's reproductive
chilling. How's your Thanksgiving, family, friends, everything is cool?
Going around the country.
All right, brother, man. You have a good one, my man.
Which obviously everyone knows is a very important electoral state. This seems to be both hugely important issue, obviously, for Democrats and the administration, but it also seems to be the beginning of a campaign, in the presidential campaign, in which reproductive rights could be the number one issue for your campaign.
It is, but I'm going to add, Lawrence, to who it is important to. It's important to the American people. The majority of Americans agree that the freedom to make decisions about one's own body should be with the individual and not the government telling them what to do. And we saw that in the midterms. We saw that whenever reproductive freedom was on the ballot, from Kansas to California, and most recently from Ohio to Virginia, the voters voted in favor of freedom. And so, yes, I'm starting in January, getting back on the road as I did with the college tour this fall, and it is the fight for our reproductive freedoms. And I'll be meeting with folks around the country of all types of background, by the way, and political party affiliation, to talk about the fact that most of us agree that one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to believe that the government should not be telling her what to do with her body. And so we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about the reality of what this means. To your point, Lawrence, many of us marched either for making sure that Roe v. Wade was strong in its protection of fundamental freedoms, And we did that for years, even when Roe v. Wade was intact. Now, past dogs, we also know this is not just the subject of a march and a protest. This is about real people every day suffering, and many of them suffering silently. We just saw the young woman, Kate Cox, and what happened to her? You're on at 10 o'clock at night, so I'm going to assume that adults are watching Orange. And we have to be real on this. In our country right now, there are women having miscarriages in France. There are women who cannot afford to go to a state that will allow them access to the health care they need, who are suffering. There's only one state in the South, and that's Virginia, that still has retained a law that allows a woman to make decisions about her own body. And so this is an issue that, yes, I do believe will be resolved in November of next year, because I do know that the American people fight for freedom and believe in the woman's right to make decisions about her own body. But understand, every day until then, there are women suffering in our country in horrible ways. And look, let me tell you, there's going to be a split screen on this too in November of 24, to your point about the election. There's really going to be, of all the issues we've discussed so far, none of them are binary. This one is. November 24, binary. On the one hand, you're going to have the folks who are standing, such as President Joe Biden and me, saying we trust women to be able to make a decision about what is in their best interest, and women can trust us to protect their fundamental freedoms. And on the other hand, you're going to have folks who want a national ban and have the gall to tell women who are even survivors of rape or incest that they don't have the right to make decisions about what happens to their body next. So I think there's going to be a clear choice on this issue and so many others next year in November.
Well, that brings us to a challenge that you have in this campaign, because there seems to be polling that shows a single-issue reaction on the Democratic side of voters, for voters whose support you've had. They don't like your policy in Israel at the moment, so they're not supporting the Biden-Harris ticket. But that same person might fully approve enthusiastically of what you just said. And so the question becomes, when you get to November, how do you take all of the different single-issue voters out there who are disappointed for various reasons in the Biden administration and say to them, here is the single issue that you should concentrate on, or here is why you should vote for this ticket despite what you don't like about the issue that you disapprove of?
I do believe, Lawrence, and I'm familiar, obviously, with the term and the philosophy about single-issue voters. But again, back to the split screen. I mean, look at bans. We want to ban assault weapons. They want to ban books. You look at it in terms of where we are in the economy. We are fighting for working people and increasing access to capital for small businesses, and they're cutting taxes on the richest people in the country to the point that they're contributing to a deficit. Where we are on choice, we just talked about. Where we are on climate, where the choice is split screen, is you got people who are denying or greenwashing and delaying progress in one of the most existential crises we've ever faced. We, on the other hand, have invested historic amounts of dollars, over $1 trillion, in the climate crisis and building a clean energy economy. I think all of these issues are important to voters who are going to be going to the polls in November, and they will make their decisions, obviously. But there are a lot of critical issues at stake. And, every election cycle we talk about this is the most election of our lifetime. Lawrence, this one is. This one is.
This is the way you were received as Vice President in your trip to Africa, and what it meant to the girls there. Let's just take a look at this. From the moment that I saw that video, I've been waiting to ask you, what did that moment feel like?
It was pure joy. We all hope in our lives that we can have an impact in a way that hopefully inspires or gives people a sense of confidence in what is possible for themselves and then who they love in their community. And it was very special, Lawrence. It was very special. And thanks for sharing that clip. I hadn't seen that. It was very special. And, you've heard me say many times, my mother would say to me, Kamala, you may be the first to do many things, make sure you're not the last. And to have, and I have been fortunate and blessed to, during the course of being vice president, have many situations where it becomes clear to me that there are, people of every age and gender, by the way, who see something about being the first that lets them know they don't need to be limited by other people's limited understanding of who can do what. And I think that's important. And it relates to all people. And so thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you.
Let's start with the hostage situation and this discussion about whether or not Israel was going to send the head of Mossad to Qatar. This is a tricky one because it's not clear whether what Hamas is interested in doing vis-a-vis further hostage negotiations. It may be actually clearer what at least some of the hardline ministers in the Israeli government are interested in doing. What's your sense of this?
Yeah, I think you're right, and the pictures that we're seeing are at least as many intra-Israeli as between Israel and the United States in this respect. The White House has been very clear and has committed very clearly its commitment to do everything possible to get the hostages out. Whereas in Israel, you have some of Netanyahu's most powerful and also most extremist ministers basically saying, you know what, this is a war we're fighting, and the hostages are not going to impede our prosecution of this war. That's the reason that these hostage families, who really are sinking into worse and worse desperation as the days tick up to around 70, they feel that they are being shunted around, and they feel that they're possibly becoming the victims of a fight between kind of Netanyahu's better angels, let's say, or his need to respond to public pressure versus his really most extremist ministers who simply don't care.
All year.
This is retro. No, it's interesting because Joe Biden has been strongly supportive of Israel literally since day one. I know when I was there, I heard people sort of jokingly saying Joe Biden is the best prime minister Israel's ever had. But this growing fissure between Biden and Netanyahu comes at a time that Netanyahu is talking about a campaign. And he's sort of putting forward this idea that I'm the one who can push back on Joe Biden. No one else will be able to do it as well as I can.
That's right. And this is Netanyahu reverting to a pretty old MO of his, in which he thinks that he can convince Israelis to increase their support for him by saying, I I'm the only international face you got. I'm the only one who speaks English like a native. I know Joe Biden for more than 40 years. Let me handle this. It's unclear whether Israelis are going to fall for this again the way they have fallen for it in the past. But what's interesting is that Israel is very much at war. The names of the dead on the Israeli side also are adding up every single day. Both new names added to the tally of the people who were killed on the original day, October 7th, and hostages being killed in Gaza, and soldiers now being killed every single day in battle. And Israelis are really still deep in that reality, this post-October 7th reality of a terrible new world. As Netanyahu has gotten up, dusted himself off, and he is happily now trying to run for an election that hasn't yet been called, but clearly he feels pressured to kind of up his numbers from around 27%.
Let's talk a little about that, because there are a lot of people who speculate that Netanyahu will not be able to hold on to his prime ministership after this war is settled, whenever that may be. Netanyahu is like a handful of other leaders in the world to whom holding office is a prevention mechanism from being prosecuted. What is Israeli society thinking about that? Because you and I have been talking for the last year.
Good morning, bro. How's your day going so far, man?
Very frustrated with
It's always a pleasure to see you, man.
and that type of behavior.
You already know him.
Right. Netanyahu's even in a slightly trickier situation because his efforts to overhaul Israel and turn it into an authoritarian state where he could, in theory, cancel his own trial were stalled. As you just mentioned, for the past year, Netanyahu attempted to push what he was calling a judicial reform and Israelis perceived as a coup d'etat. By the way, Joe Biden was loudly critical of that during the entire period and returned often to the concept of the shared values that Israel and the United States had to keep preserving. So what we see now is Netanyahu's actually on trial. He's prosecuting this war. His trial has renewed. His lawyers are trying to push, back the number of weekly sessions of the trial, push back the date of the restarted trial, pushing. But the fact of the matter, he is in power, and he would like to stay in power so that he can try to return to those coup d'etat legislative efforts, and then maybe still be able to cancel his trial. That is clearly still on the agenda. His justice minister isn't hiding it. He's refused to convene the Judicial Appointments Committee. He's trying to really kind of freeze that whole process. But we don't know when this war will be over or what Netanyahu will consider it. I think that that's the number one issue being discussed right now with the United States here in Jerusalem, which is, when are you going to say this is over? When is this daily grind of war? And what can we install afterwards?
I want to go back to, I was in Uvalde right after the shooting, and I remember speaking to a number of people about how you solve this problem in Texas. Texas is tricky because even it doesn't break on Democratic-Republican lines as it relates to gun ownership the way it does in some northern states. It's a tricky one. And you have tried and suggested numerous ways in which Texas can handle this issue. But really, in the wake of Uvalde,
You were just at the VA hospital?
to own a gun in
Oh, okay. Oh, you're getting your psychiatric stuff? Oh, your knee.
It's broken on so many issues. It's broken on guns and gun violence. It's broken on women's reproductive rights issues. We don't, Ted Cruz didn't break everything that's wrong in Texas, but he certainly embodied it all. We can somehow live in a state where someone can walk down the street with an AR-15 with impunity and not be stopped by law enforcement officers. We're living in a state where we have the most mass shootings of any state in the last 2 years. We are certainly aiming in this issue, and the solutions are right there in front of us. Even Republican voters want to see an age limit increase. They want to see universal background checks, and they want to see
nice to meet you, bro.
protective orders.
Say what's up to my homie.
Fundamentally, we should be talking about assault weapons bans in this country. Look, it's one thing to talk about gun violence, and it's another thing to go in and see all of those dead children. I had to sue the state when I saw every bit of that carnage, and I saw all of those children lying on the floor, some of them unidentifiable. We have to change what's broken in this state.
What does popular sentiment around this issue look like? Again, it's easy for some people to think of this as black and white, yes and no, gun rights versus gun control. It's complicated in Texas. What looks like success to you with respect to gun violence in Texas?
Well, I think success, Alan, has to start with getting rid of Ted Cruz, who doesn't even want to talk about this issue. And if people are frustrated, they can go to RolandForTexas.com and look at the solutions that we have going forward. But success could mean having an age limit increased to 21. Most Republicans in the state are in favor of that. Success could be extreme risk protective orders. And Republicans are coming around on red flags because they know that they don't want a mentally ill person to access weapons, and we should have the power to be able to take those away when they're making threats. And certainly universal background checks. And that said, I don't shirk from
I'm working on some video game, Pokemon Go and shit.
I don't wish anybody to see those pictures or those images, but sometimes I wonder what would change things if Americans saw what happened to those poor babies.
But it's going to be more of a skate game.
You talk about Senator Cruz not wanting to answer questions on this. Obviously, one of the reasons we don't talk about the gun issue in Texas is because for the last year, other than the period around Uvalde, we have been preoccupied with the reproductive rights issue in Texas because Texas is leading the country in the draconian, not just the laws, but the actual way that it's playing out. Your colleague, Ted Cruz, not your colleague, the person you're hoping to run against, Ted Cruz, is avoiding questions about Kate Cox, the woman who has now had to leave your state to seek reproductive care. These are both issues that are sort of top of mind for most Texans right now.
For most Texans, Republicans and Democrats, let's be very clear. I mean, you're right. He doesn't want to answer anything on guns. He wants to think about it and pray about it with people, and that's the end of that, with no real solutions. When it comes to reproductive rights, he wants us all to go talk to his press secretary. The fact is, this poor woman, Kate Cox, who was on the verge of a tremendous implication with her pregnancy and the problem that she was having, could have died from it, certainly was put in this situation and had to leave Texas after being attacked by the Attorney General, being attacked by Ted Cruz, being attacked by the Supreme Court of Texas. Republican men in this state have just wrought havoc on women and their reproductive choices. We have to be able to go at a federal level and codify Roe v. Wade, possibly expand the Supreme Court, and certainly change the filibuster on the issues that are most important to us, like gun violence, like reproductive rights, like electoral laws. The vast majority of Americans are in favor of.
Justine, you and I ruminate on this topic a lot. What's the disconnect between 3.7% unemployment? Inflation, 3.1% is largely where people think inflation can exist. What's going on between what's happening and what people are saying they feel?
Ali, I think those inflation scars are really, really deep, and it will take a lot of time to heal those wounds. And I think that's what the Treasury Secretary was sort of suggesting, that over time people are going to realize that the worst of the inflation is behind us and that things are getting better. That inflation situation was pretty scary coming out of the pandemic. I also think that you and I, econo nerds like you and I, we talk about inflation rates, but Americans talk about price levels. And so a 3.1% inflation rate is on top of the 7% inflation in November last year. That's 10% if you add those two together, right? Just for back of the envelope math. So people are still paying more for their grocery bill today than they were 2 or 3 years ago, and they know that.
Justine, let me ask you about this. I know you think about this a lot. How much of inflation is real because wages are up, people earn more money, employers have to pay more money to get their employees. That's sort of a real thing, and over time that levels out. And then there's this thing where people say some companies raise prices because in an inflationary environment, that's what consumers think is going to happen, and maybe they're profiteering from that movement. What do you think of that analysis?
Yeah, you're talking about that greedflation, I think, is what progressives call it. And companies, when you talk to them, they say their inputs are going up too. So they're raising prices because their inputs are going up. But when you look at corporate profits have been pretty good this year, right? So profits have still been good, and they've been passing along price increases. So I don't know how much the so-called greedflation fits into the whole thing. I do know that a big chunk of inflation is shelter costs. It's the cost of housing, and that's been really, really tough to turn the curve on. And Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, yesterday said they think that those are going to start to come down. The shelter costs will start to come down next year. The Fed chief said the same thing. It takes a long time to turn sort of that chart. And they're hoping that but shelter's been a real big part of the problem. And Allie, you can switch which cuts of meat you buy at the grocery store if you're trying to manage inflation in your grocery bill. You can't change where you live overnight. And so that's why that part of the inflation story has been really troubling.
What about the idea that there are countries, particularly Northern Europe, where wages are higher than they are, let's say, for the average American, and over time costs go up too, but they don't feel it as much. When you go to Oslo, Norway, everything's expensive, but people earn well and they've got health care and their education is paid for, so they generally feel better about higher wages. Is that something that's going to happen to us over time, where our wages will go up or prices will go up, but we'll resettle at a higher level?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's hard to make that comparison because you have, for example, the United States. One of the reasons why I think so many people say they don't feel good about the economy is you can't get daycare. You can't get a babysitter. You have, I think, 20% fewer people in the daycare, in the child care industry than you had before the pandemic, right? It's expensive. Child care is more than the same as the cost of going to public college in a lot of states. It's real. So there are these things about the American economy that bother people that are still just, it's friction in your day-to-day life of going back to work. And I think that is one of the reasons why these sentiment polls have been so consistently negative about how people feel about the economy. I've been calling it the Southwest economy. I'll say to people, look at all these things that are going right, and they just give me a funny face. They don't feel it. And so I think that's something that maybe time will heal. But the Fed certainly thinks that, Allie, that they've got this right. I'm not declaring victory on inflation yet, but all the ingredients of a soft landing is what the Fed chief was trumpeting yesterday.
So we've got record numbers in stock markets. We got the Dow at the highest level it's ever been, the NASDAQ, the S&P 500. If you've got a 401k, that'll be reflected in these numbers. But the other number that I think you and I would agree is substantially more important is the unemployment rate at 3.7%. How many years did you and I believe that 5% was full employment, right? That there's always going to be 5% of the society who's in flux and moving around. 3.7%. Tell me what you make of that. That's, on one hand, great because it's causing wages to go up. On the other hand, it's in some places a severe labor shortage. When you talk about why people can't get child care or care at their home, because those people are doing something else that pays more money.
Yeah, and in some cases why more women aren't working more hours at their job because they can't get the child care that they need. Look, that unemployment rate is just spectacular. I mean, it really is. There are 8 million open jobs in America right now, way more open jobs than people who are looking for work. And the other thing is the Fed, in its sort of forecast, Allie, for next year, I mean, it sees the economy slowing. It sees the jobless rate rising to a whopping 4.1%, which is still historically low. So the Fed thinks it can achieve this price stability, which is looking for a 2% sort of price growth in the economy and not kill the job market in the process. And I sure hope they're right. I sure hope they're right for all of our sakes. But anything can happen. Just think about this year, Allie. At the beginning of the year, it was not if there'd be a recession, but when and how terrible. And they got it wrong. It was just wrong. There wasn't a recession this year. I also think that all that talking and forecasting of recessions might be one of the reasons why people feel so lousy about the economy now, even though we didn't have one.
Trump is disqualified from holding the office of president and from appearing on the Republican primary ballot in that state. In a more than 200-page ruling, the court found that Trump is ineligible for the White House under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The court found that the district court was correct in its early ruling, calling the January 6th attack on the Capitol an insurrection, and that Trump, quote, engaged in that insurrection through his personal actions. The court noted, we do not reach these conclusions lightly. We are mindful of the magnitude and weight of the questions now before us. We are likewise mindful of our solemn duty to apply the law without fear or favor and without being swayed by public reaction to the decisions that the law mandates we reach. This frankly stunning and unprecedented decision could have major implications in the 2024 race, in which Trump is currently the Republican frontrunner. The decision will likely be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which could decide the matter on a national level. And when a big news item like this drops, there's one person we want to talk to more than anybody else. So, of course, Rachel Maddow joins me now on the phone. Rachel, we had a whole show planned, my friend, and that is completely upended. This is what we're talking about now. I am in front of, festooned with papers in front of me, but I just want to listen to you react to what Colorado's Supreme Court has done.
Yeah, Joy, first of all, thank you for having me on. I know it's very short notice and we're all just trying to absorb this. I mean, listen, I think in the broad strokes, in terms of our democracy, there are very few magic wands. there are very few sort of magic spells that you cast that make a complex and difficult problem go away. It just doesn't happen very often in our political system, and I think that we shouldn't be under any illusions about the character and the partisan inclinations, among other things, of this current Supreme Court as it is constituted. That said, this is not a crazy thing for a democracy to do. This is something that was a hallmark of post-war Germany after World War II. This is something that happened to Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil quite recently. This is something that our own Congress did in 1868 after our own Civil War, specifically to preclude anybody from holding office in this country who had engaged in insurrection against this country. And so it's not unheard of, but it would be an incredible wild card.
It would indeed, and to your very point, there are 14 members who were expelled during the Civil War for supporting the Confederacy. The 14th Amendment, Section 3, was written for the Confederacy. It was written because of that insurrection. And I think what was the most stunning to me, Rich, I haven't gone through this, a very, very thick ruling. It's a big stack of paper. But the part that I've gotten through, what I found the most stunning, is that what this court has said is that the previous court, the lower court, was not wrong in saying that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. Their only error was saying that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which again was to prevent insurrectionists from serving, didn't apply to presidents. They said, oh no, we agree with the lower court. He did engage in insurrection, but Section 3 does in fact apply to presidents. I guess it was surprising that the lower court said that it didn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. After that district court ruling, the Trump side appealed part of it, and the plaintiffs appealed the other part of it. And so it was a real question as to what the Colorado Supreme Court was going to do here. But I mean, let's keep in mind the scale of this. So this is about Colorado only. You said it will likely be appealed to the Supreme Court. It will certainly be appealed to the United States Supreme Court. And then their ruling. Depending on what they rule, they could just swat this down and make this go away. But if they engage with it in a more nuanced way, or if indeed they agree with the findings of the Colorado Supreme Court, then this will be something that has national implications, and this will apply in many states. And so, listen, I don't think this is the way that Donald Trump's political career ends ultimately, because of what we know about this iteration of the United States Supreme Court. But the factual findings about him having engaged in insurrection, as defined technically for the purposes of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which says insurrectionists cannot hold office in this country. It's not that you can't run for office, it's that you cannot hold office in this country because you have broken your oath. That is it's not a flippant decision. They did fact finding. to arrive at that, and it's going to matter some way. I don't believe it will be a magic wand that ends his political career, but this is a substantive finding and a real surprise from the Colorado.
Absolutely. Well, let's break that down into two pieces. Let's first talk about how much it could expand, like how much this could metastasize for Donald Trump, the worries over Colorado, right? This is not a swing state that he would likely win anyway, whatever. But there are other state courts that have already rejected